Let's review sequences in Premiere. Now we've already worked a little bit with sequences, and as you know, if you have a video and you grab it and drag it to the timeline window, Premiere is going to automatically create a sequence for you. This is the way we've created sequences so far, but there are a number of ways that you can create sequences, and there's some nuances that you need to know about when you create sequences as well. When you create sequence this way, the sequence settings are based on the video that you first placed in the timeline. So if we scroll over in our project window, you can see that this particular video file is fairly large. This is the resolution, 5312 by 2988. This is a 5K video, so the size of the video is fairly large. And if we scroll back, the other thing that I want to point out is the frame rate. So the frame rate of this video clip is roughly 60 frames per second. This particular clip is shot at a higher frame rate than what we would need for most projects. I tend to shoot my underwater videos at 5K and at 60 frames per second because I pull stills from my videos, and since the action can be fast, it gives me a better opportunity to get stills. But if you're doing a standard project, you're probably not going to be working at such a high frame rate. A more standard frame rate is going to be working at 29.97 or roughly 30 frames per second. So if I grab this clip right here, and if we check the physical size, you can see that the physical size is slightly smaller. So if I grab this clip and I drag it into the timeline, it's going to add it to our timeline and everything seems like it's fine. But if we scrub through, you'll see that as soon as we get to the second clip is smaller, and you can see that it doesn't quite fill the entire frame, and that's because the video information, the video size, is different. They don't match up. So clearly this can be problematic. Now there are ways to work around this, and I'll mention those in just a minute, but I did want to point out that when you're working with your video, if you're going to be using video that's different sizes, this could be a problem. And what we don't want to do is we don't want to scale up. So technically I could grab this video clip and I could scale it up, but if I do that, I'm going to be losing resolution. So let's just go ahead and let's close this sequence. And just to keep things organized, I'm going to rename this sequence. The sequence is right here, and we'll just call this example 1. And let's move this to our sequence bin. And now let's go ahead and let's create a new sequence. So as you can see, I have some videos that are shot at 920 by 1080. Then I have a video that's 3840 by 2160, and then I have these 5K videos. So I'm kind of all over the place. So I'm just going to randomly grab a few of these videos. I'll grab one of the 1920 by 1440s. I'm going to hold down my command key and we'll grab this 4K video, and then we'll grab this 5K video. And I'm going to place these into my timeline. So right now, the timeline has 3 different sizes of video clips. They don't all match. And if we scrub through the timeline, you'll see that here is the first video clip. This one right here with the E name is our smallest one. And because this was the first video clip that I brought into the sequence, this is my sequence size. If the timeline is selected and we go up to sequence and we go to sequence settings, you can see that the sequence is set at 1920 by 1440. It inherited the size, and in addition to that, it also inherited the frame rate. So if we take a look at this video, I think it's this one right here, and we just scroll over, you can see that the frame rate of this video, actually it looks like this frame rate is roughly 60 frames per second. So when we look at our sequence settings, and we have to have the timeline selected if we want to reference the sequence settings, you'll see that the time base is going to inherit from that particular video. So actually I think it's this video, which I'm not sure what this frame rate is, but 47.86. So this is different, and some of the other clips that we've brought in have different frame rates. the sequence is going to be based on that first frame. So what that means is when I go to one of these other clips, it's cropping this video a little bit. So this particular video clip is this one right here. And if we look, you can see how the dimensions are different. It's more squared in the program window, where here it's more of a rectangle. And if we scroll over to the last video clip that we brought in, let's just zoom out a little bit here. You'll see that this one is also being cropped, and this one was our 5K video. That's this video right here. So once again, it is cropping this video and forcing it to be considerably smaller than what we have. So clearly there's a little bit of a problem. So we have a couple options. We could potentially click on this clip, and if we use the contextual menu, we can say scale to frame size, and that's going to scale this video clip down to the frame size. Now, because the proportions of the video clip are not the same, we will get these black bars. But now I can see this entire video clip. It is no longer cropping this video clip. And if we do the same thing on this second video clip, which also is kind of being cropped, if you will, I can scroll down and I can find the scale to frame size. It's going to scale it down, and again, we'll get black bars if it doesn't have the same aspect ratio. So that is something to keep in mind. Obviously, the best way to approach a project is to use media that is all shot at the same size. If you are shooting your media, you can be more in control, but if you're using different cameras and acquiring media from different people, then there's a chance that your media is not going to be standard. So it is something to be aware of. When you do drag a video clip to the sequence, the very first video clip that gets added into the sequence is going to set the size of that particular sequence. So all of the size settings are going to inherit from that particular clip. That is something to watch for. Another way that you can create a sequence is to go to the File menu and go to New and choose Sequence, or you could use the keyboard shortcut of Command or Control N. When you set up a sequence this way, it's going to open the New Sequence dialog box, and this dialog box is going to have a ton of choices. It can be a little overwhelming when you first start working with Premiere because there are so many different options that you have available. The default options is a 1080p with 30 frames. And if we look over here, it gives us kind of a rundown of what the exact dimensions are. So if this sounds like something I want to use, I can just click OK. The sequence is set up. And now when I grab a video and bring it into the sequence, whether the video is going to match the sequence or not, I do have some video clips that are the same size. So if I drag this clip in and drop it here, this one is the same physical size, but more than likely the frame rate is not going to be the same. Let's go ahead and let's just say change sequence settings. And if we click that, the sequence settings are now going to update, and they are now going to be indicative of what this particular video clip is. So if we go into our sequence settings, we can see that the frame rate, the time base has changed. So originally when I set up the sequence, it was 30 frames per second. Now it's changed it to 60 frames per second. Conversely, and I'm just going to do undo to get back. If we undo that and we bring in the same clip and drag it in, and instead of saying change sequence settings, if we say keep existing settings, then what's going to happen is the clip's going to get dropped into this project, and it's going to just drop some of our frames because this particular clip, if we check the frame rate, it's again 60 frames per second. If we select the timeline and go into our sequence settings, you'll see that the sequence is set at a time base of 30 frames per second. And it is worth noting that the time base, I'm saying 30 frames per second, but you can see right here it's saying 29.97. That is so close that we just say 30 frames per second. It's the 3 frame difference, which is going to be imperceivable to anyone who is viewing the actual video. So we consider 29.97, which is a frame rate that was inherited from like NTSC standard video. And because it's so close, we just say 30 frames per second. So I'm doing the same thing on this 59.94. I'm saying 60 frames per second, but exactly it's a couple frames less. So I just wanted to point that out to you as well. Needless to say, it is possible to use video files that are not going to be the exact same frame rate as the sequence or even the exact size of the sequence, but you do need to be aware of the media that you're bringing in, because Premiere, depending on how you've set up your sequence and or which files you've added to the sequence first to establish those sequence settings, there might be a disconnect. And if so, Premiere is going to warn you, and then you can decide what you're going to do and what that change should be. So if I grab this particular clip right here, which has a frame rate of 48 frames per second, and if we check the size, it's obviously a different size. If I bring this into my sequence, you can see that when I scrub over to this clip, it is filling the space, and that's because this clip is bigger than our sequence. But if I was to right click on this clip and choose to scale to frame size, then it's going to add the black bands if that's something that is necessary. So do keep those things in mind. I'm going to just grab this sequence and put it in my sequence bin, and let's just call this example 3. And the final method in which you can create sequences is if you select a few clips from your project pane, you can right click and you can choose to create a new sequence from clip. So if we go ahead and do this, it's going to make a new sequence, and the sequence is going to contain these 3 clips that I had selected. So they're going to be placed into the sequence. And of course, if we check our sequence settings, they're going to be based on the size of the clips that we brought in, specifically the first clip that we selected. All of these 3 clips that I selected are the same physical dimensions and the same frame rate. So we didn't have any issues with scaling as we did before, but it is a way that you can, again, create a sequence from some existing items. And there's one other final way, and that is in the project pane. If you click on this new item icon, you can make a new sequence this way. And this is the same as just going up to File, New, and creating a new sequence, or using the keyboard shortcut. We have the new sequence pane, and we would need to determine what the specific settings are going to be and make the sequence in that way. So lots of different ways in which you can make sequences. I just wanted to introduce you to these so that you know that there are differences in the way that you can approach a project. You may have a project where the media that you're going to be using are different sizes, and maybe the final product needs to be a specific size. So in that case, you're probably going to want to set up your project by specifying the sequence settings and then dealing with the video if the video doesn't coincide with those settings. Or you can simply grab your video and drag them into your project, and then the sequence settings are going to be based on that specific video and the attributes that that video has.